Hello, everyone. As Martin has said, I'm Barbara Henry and I'm from the Health Products Regulatory Authority in Ireland, and we cover a range of medicines and device regulation. So today I'm going to kind of focus on good distribution practices. I suppose to give you an understanding of who I am and my role, so I have been with the Health Products Regulatory Authority, or as we call it for short, HPRA, for 10 years. I started originally in market compliance with looking at the regulation around advertising, quality defects and recalls, before moving on to health products distribution team, where I was a health products distribution inspector, so looking at GDP I moved about 7 years ago, and for the last about 4 or 5 years, I've been the HPD inspections manager, so coordinating the inspections program for GDP for the HPRA. So I will just give you an overview of what I'm going to talk about today. So just to try and not delve too much into detail, but more to give you a sense of what the HPRA is, how GDP is incorporated into the HPRA. We'd need to look at a little bit about wholesaling, and then how the guides of good distribution practice feed into how we inspect wholesalers in Ireland. Then I'm also going to go down through our GDP inspections program, how it's set up, what does it look like on a daily, weekly basis, but also then around some of the common deficiencies that we do find on our inspection program, to give you kind of an insight into how we link the inspections with the GDP guidelines. And then also look at a recent inspection case that hopefully will be of interest to show you then where the inspection process and deficiencies and GDPs come into play. So the first question, and just this is for me, is to get a little bit of a knowledge on, do you have any experience on good distribution practice with medicines or active substances? Again, this is just so I know, hopefully there will be parts of the presentation that will be new to some people, but there might also be some parts that, like I said, I won't go into great detail, but just a general overview. Okay, so I can see that we do have some experience with good distribution practice with medicines or active substances. Just to let you know, I suppose the distribution of active substances also falls under the remit of my team. So we do go out and inspect on them as well. So while the presentation is probably aimed at medicines, there is a quite alignment with active substances. And again, there is an alignment with veterinary medicinal products as well. The new GDPs on veterinary medicinal products were based on the human medicinal products, so they are very similar. And in Ireland, then we worked close with our colleagues who were responsible for the inspections of the GDP of veterinary medicinal products. So there is an alignment. So hopefully, if you think that the presentation is very medicines focused, just to have that in the back of a mind, that active substance GDPs and veterinary medicine GDP are very similar. Okay, so a little bit of background on who the Health Products Regulatory Authority are. So as I said, we regulate medicines and devices for the benefit of people and animals in Ireland and Europe. We do regulate a number of areas, which you can see there. So we have human medicines, veterinary medicines, medical devices. We also regulate clinical trials, blood and blood components, human tissues and cells, human organs for transport, controlled substances, cosmetics. The use of animals for scientific protection or purposes also falls under our remit. We have a scientific animal protection unit, and the active substances for human and veterinary medicine. So we do regulate a wide number of areas. I suppose what you'll find is in my team, we will look at the human medicines and the active substances for human and veterinary medicine. So that's what I'm going to focus on today. Now, there's a number of departments within the HPRA, so they are split up into, all those different sections are split up throughout the HPRA. So how do we regulate? So I suppose from a HPRA side, we will inspect companies and facilities which test, make and distribute health products to ensure that they comply with relevant standards and legislation. We then also grant licenses to companies that make, distribute, or market medicines after a review of their safety, quality, and effectiveness. We continuously monitor medicine, so we have a section there for vigilance on human medicines. Our veterinary department would do the veterinary medicines. We have a medical device department, and then our other health products would be stuff like the cosmetics and controlled substances. So we also have to respond quickly to any safety or quality concerns. And then we produce safety and quality information to support the safe use of the health products. So again, information is available on the website if you want to kind of have a look at the remit of the HPRA. So the team I work in, so this is one small team in the compliance department, which is a department of about 70 to 80 people. And in our team, we look at the distributors and importers of active substances. We look at the distributors and brokers of human medicinal products. We look at manufacturers and distributors of cosmetics. And we also do all the safety information around cosmetics. For controlled drugs and precursor chemicals, we look at the manufacturers and distributors, but also other entities that will hold and store them. And I just have a little note there on the slide just to say that the distribution of veterinary medicines is regulated by the Department of Agriculture in Ireland. So I suppose if you're looking for a contact in relation to veterinary medicine wholesaling, the Department of Agriculture would be who you would go to there. So the team is set up as follows. So we have a health products distribution manager who oversees the 4 different sections within our team. So we have cosmetics, which we are the competent authority for. And under that section, we have a cosmetics manager, a cosmetics inspector. So we do go out and inspect distributors and manufacturers of cosmetics in Ireland under the EU regulations. And we have 2 scientific officers. We then have the distribution of medicine, which would fall under my team's remit, which is the inspection of wholesalers and brokers of human medicine, including active substances. And there's myself, the HPD inspections manager. We have 5 inspectors and we have 1 scientific officer. So, and then we have a monitoring of retail sales, and this is 1 scientific officer, and they look after the EU regulation around paracetamol, unauthorized medicines, and the incorrect sale method. The other part that falls under our remit is controlled drugs and precursor chemicals. So for this, we aren't the competent authority, but we do all the processing and inspections on behalf. The competent authority in Ireland is the Department of Health for controlled drugs. For precursor chemicals, we are the competent authority. Under this, we have a HPD inspections manager, which is myself, 2 scientific officers, but our 5 inspectors also inspect against the precursor chemical and controlled drug legislation. So they're kind of an interlinked section. So just to start off with, I suppose, what is GDP? So we know that it's good distribution practice, and as I can see that we have some experience on good distribution practice in the room, so which is good. I suppose the guidelines are there and they're required to be followed for anyone involved in the wholesaling of medicine. So before we go into the look at that specific guidelines on GDP, I'm just going to go through the different types of wholesalers of medicine. So we do have, and the definition I suppose for wholesaling is wholesale distribution is defined as procure, so that's the buying or receiving of medicinal products, the holding or the storage of medicinal products, the supply, which is the selling or the giving of medicinal products, and the export is the exportation of medicinal products from the EU to a country outside the EU. Now, the difference is wholesaling can be made up of one of these activities or all of these activities. So if you just do one of these activities, you require a wholesale authorization and you are required to be inspected. Or if you do 2 of them, so a lot of times in Ireland we will see procure and supply go together. You would still require a wholesale distribution authorization, still required to be inspected, and you'll still required to meet the GDPs. So distribution networks, I suppose we all probably know that today the distribution network is complex. It's not simply that a manufacturer manufactures medicine and the next step is that it goes to a patient or end consumer. There is multiple players within that middle piece. So when it leaves the manufacturer and before it gets to the patient. And traceability is key in this, and this is where compliance to the GDPs comes into play. So the different pieces of wholesale distribution and where the GDPs sit and the requirements around that, I've just broken up into 3 pieces in this slide. So the first one is the procurement. That's the purchasing. Again, there's regulations and compliance to the GDPs is required for this piece. When we move into the holding, the GDPs are very specific around the different areas that are involved if you hold medicinal products. So you have the receipt, how you're meant to receipt them in, the storage of them, how they're meant to be stored, how you pick and pack them, that all comes down to your traceability. We have quarantine, how they move from storage to quarantine. That's a piece that is, there is detailed information in the GDPs around the movement of quarantine and the movement to destruction and what is required around the traceability. Then when we move from the holding or the storage piece to the supplier export piece, we have to consider transport. In the latest revision of the GDPs, transport was given its own chapter because the mindset now is that while we might maintain the storage conditions while they're in your warehouse, you also need to maintain them while it goes out into transport and to the next destination. And there we will look for and inspect to see that has that being qualified. So it's the continuation piece of the storage into transport and the responsibility up until they're delivered. And then unfortunately, a number of times you will have recalls and you will have returned medicinal products, and about how these are handled and how they're segregated and the responsibilities are outlined in the GDPs for wholesalers on how they're meant to handle them. As I previously said, in Ireland and across Europe, not all wholesalers are the same, so they don't all just hold medicinal products. We have full line wholesalers who will do everything. They will procure them, they will hold them, they will sell them, and they will export them. We also have a type of wholesaler who's a procure and supply wholesaler. They only do the financial transactions. They will never physically hold your product, but the GDPs apply to them, and so does a wholesale distribution authorization. The other type of wholesaler is a contract storage site. So this type of wholesaler will never own the medicinal products. They will only do the storage piece on behalf of someone else. So when we're looking at them, we have technical agreements, outsourcing, audits to look at, as well as how they're actually physically holding the products and how they manage quarantine and destruction and the interlinking relationships between who owns it and them holding it. And then finally, we have a broker who are also called out in the European GDPs. And these are people who will never own the product, never hold the product, but they do the kind of interaction between getting a manufacturer and a wholesaler to the transactions between them. So they will kind of, do the deal, but won't physically pay or financially pay or physically receive the product. And the GDPs actually also apply to brokers. They are called out with the specific requirements. The only piece in the GDPs that don't apply to brokers are the physical holding piece. So just very simply, the supply chain. So this is a very simple supply chain. So we have a manufacturer who sells it to a wholesaler, who sells it to possibly another wholesaler, who then will sell it to someone who's authorized to supply the public. And since the implementation of the Falsified Medicines Directive, the first wholesaler out of a manufacturer is known as a designated wholesaler. So when we look at falsified medicines and as the supply chain and for traceability, we also have to look and inspect against the Falsified Medicines Directive and check that those requirements are there. And we're not going to go into the Falsified Medicines Directive today, but it's just to know that, on top of the GDPs, there are other directives that feed into the GDPs, and the responsibilities and requirements are also looked at. And so here's a supply chain with the financial movement. So as I said, the physical and financial movement of a product may be different these days. We have wholesalers who only deal with the financial one. So it will go from manufacturer to the procure and supply wholesaler. Again, they will never physically receive product. They're not authorized to hold any product at their site. And then they will sell to another wholesaler or possibly the end customer. Then with the physical supply chain, will go from the manufacturer to a contract storage site. So that's the site that will only hold the product. They will never own the product, and they normally have a relationship with a procure and supply wholesaler, and they will either then sell it on down to another wholesaler or to the end customer. So it's really important for the traceability of product and for supply chain and to comply with the GDPs is that you have, or that your wholesalers have knowledge of who they're both financially receiving the product from and selling it to, but also who they're physically receiving the product from and selling it to, and they're called out in the GDPs. So does a manufacturer require a wholesale distribution authorization? Well, there's two answers. No, if they manufacture and distribute the products from the manufacturing site. And yes, they do require to apply for a wholesale distribution authorization if they have products that are not manufactured at their site, but they're distributing it from a manufacturing site. In both cases, regardless of whether they require a WDA or not, they require to be compliant with good distribution practice. So just to give you a little bit of information about wholesale distribution authorizations in Ireland and how we manage them. So in Ireland, we give one wholesale distribution authorization, or WDA, per site. So a company could have a number of sites in Ireland, but each of the sites will be issued their own WDA. In some member states, they will give one WDA and list the sites on them. But again, it depends on how you want to set it up. On our WDA, we will issue the authorised activities. So we'll have procure, hold, supply and export. And I suppose a difference in Ireland compared to some of the other member states is that we list all the categories of medicinal product on a WDA. In some member states, I suppose the requirement is there to list the medicinal products that have extra kind of requirements, such as cold chain, narcotics. But in Ireland, we decide to list them all. So we'll go down as far as prescription only, medicines, over the counter, unauthorized, exempts and stuff. So they're listed down. And just to recap on a procure and supply site, because I know in Ireland, when the new veterinary GDPs came in, the Department of Agriculture, this was a new entity for them that they didn't have. So their wholesalers up to the point of the new GDPs were always physically holding the medicinal products. They had never seen a procure and supply site for veterinary medicines. So a lot of new companies had fallen under their remit. So just to be aware that this type of wholesaler will fall under the inspection programme. So you must be an authorised wholesaler to procure and supply medicinal products. You're authorised only for the financial products. So you're not authorised to hold or store any medicinal product at its site. And in Ireland, we list contract storage sites on a wholesale distribution authorisation. So any site that is just procure and supply has to have a nominated contract storage site. Now, there is a reason why we do this, and that is because anyone who is selling medicines, they might get a return of a medicine. And if you don't, and you physically can't receive it to your site, you need somewhere for it to go. So that is where we have made the decision that every procure and supply site must name a contract storage site. So somewhere where they can send medicines if they need it to. The other thing is we only list contract storage sites that are in Europe or in an EEA member state. And the reason for that is because if the medicines are outside of Europe, to bring them into Europe, they need to come in through an MIA holder. And therefore, a WDA can't bring in those products, has to come through a manufacturing authorization first for that import piece. So if you ever look at the Irish WDAs, you'll see that we'll list all the categories. We will, if they're procure and supply, they'll have a contract storage site, so somewhere where that can hold the medicines, but that contract storage site will be in Europe or within an EEA state. So procure and supply only WDAs do lead to, I suppose, a few difficulties rather than your bricks and mortar wholesaler that has the medicines. The reasons why is that now, I suppose, a lot of us will probably remote work or hybrid work some of the days of the week. So for them, they're saying, well, we only buy and sell, we just issue invoices. Surely we can do it from my house, or I'm working from home today. But actually, to meet the EU GDP guidelines, there needs to be a permanent physical presence or premises. You're only authorised to wholesale from that particular site. So if you're issuing your invoices from a house or from a different office, you're actually wholesaling at an unauthorised site. So again, it's about having equipment and records at the site, and also having staff available on site that who actually know about what is going on in relation to the wholesale authorisation. In Ireland, for all wholesale authorisations, and the GDP's requested is that there is a responsible person. So while we don't stipulate that the responsible person has to be in Ireland, they have to have access to the records, and there has to be someone on site who knows about wholesaling in the absence of that responsible person. So then a contract storage site. We will issue a contract storage site, a WDA of its own, but again, that's because in Ireland we say that every wholesaler is required to have a WDA, and they store medicines on behalf of another wholesaler, and they will also be listed on that WDA of that other wholesaler. And the main point with them is that they don't own the medicines. This is just an example of the format. So there's a template that's provided for the union format of a wholesale distribution authorization, and just so you can see the type of information that will be on WDA authorization. So you'll have the authorization number, you'll have the legal entity, which may not be the name of the actual wholesaling site. You'll have the legal entity's address, again, may be different to the wholesaling site. And then you'll have the different categories of medicinal products which they are allowed to wholesale, and you'll also have the named responsible person. So the person who under the regulations has the full responsibility over the wholesaling activities. So wholesaling and GDP and how they are intertwined. So we have the guidelines on good distribution practice of medicines, which are here. I have a copy, have my notes. They are what we go to when we're on inspection, and we have all our guidance and documents done upon them. These lay down the appropriate tools to assist wholesalers in conducting their activities and to prevent falsified medicines from entering the legal supply chain. In relation to falsified medicines, we now have on top of that the Falsified Medicines Directive, which again would feed into the GDPs and what you would look for to check for compliance. So why implement GDP? Well, compliance with these guidelines ensure control of the distribution chain and helps them to maintain the quality and the integrity of the medicinal products, which is the outcome, that the medicinal product, when manufactured, by the time it gets to the patient, we want to ensure that it's still as effective as it was when it was manufactured. So the second question is just if you can take a moment just to think of words and phrases that you may associate with good distribution practice. So there's some good words coming up there, a lot that we would see and use in our day-to-day work when we're describing GDPs and an inspection. And also a lot of the words that will come up within the GDP guidelines there. And we'll be having a look at some of them in particular over the next part of the presentation. So some of the words that have been put in, again, would relate to the GDP. So we have transport, we have temperature control, monitoring, and we have storage. A lot of the GDPs are around assurance. They are around the quality of the medicines. There is a significant amount of trust that is required with your wholesalers and your distributors of medicine. And then tracking, they're looking for that traceability down through it. Okay, so the next part, what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of focus on the 10 chapters of the GDPs. I'm not going to go into them in full detail. They're available if you Google and you can have a look, but I'm going to pick out some of the parts that we would tend to see a lot of deficiencies around, or the parts where we find in Ireland wholesalers may struggle to get to the level or the quality that we would look for. So as I said, there's 10 chapters in the GDPs. They range from quality management, which is basically the underlying cornerstone of your good distribution practice. If you have a good quality system in place, this will allow for you to identify issues early, and it will also mean that your operation will work within the good distribution guidelines and meet the requirements there. We have personnel, which details around the types of people and in particular the main responsible person that each site is required. Premises and equipment gives a lot of detail on what is expected around the storage and of medicines. Documentation, operations, again, that's about who you're getting it from, where are you selling it to, and that piece on holding. Complaints, returns, suspected falsified medicinal products and recalls is chapter 6 in your GDPs. Outsourced activities is given a chapter by itself. So how, I suppose, as the supply chains are getting more complex and wholesalers, the level of operations are getting more difficult, they are now tending to outsource a lot of their GDP responsibilities or duties. They still maintain their responsibility. Self-inspections is key to actually maintaining compliance and understanding is your operation in compliance. So again, there is a section on that. Chapter 9 is transportation. This was new when the GDPs were revised to actually give such, I suppose, responsibility to transportation, and that to say that it is quite necessary for the GDPs. And then the other part in the medicines GDP was the specific provisions for brokers. So they're the people who'll never own it and never hold medicines, but will broker the deals between two entities. Now, for those who are going to do vet medicinal products, the only difference between the new veterinary GDPs and the human ones is that they don't actually have chapter 10 around brokers, but you'll see that they're exactly the same from quality management all around transportation. So quality management system. So I'll have a look only at a few of the chapters of the GDPs in a little bit more detail. And then for the end part of the presentation, I'll go on to have a look and show you kind of the deficiencies that we see in our inspection program and how our inspection program runs. So for a quality management system, there is a requirement that every wholesaler has a quality management system in place, and that it sets out the responsibilities and processes and risk management principles in relation to their activities. Mainly what you're looking for is there's change controls, there's deviation management, there's risk assessment, and there's management review. The GDPs call out that there is management involvement. So when you go to the companies and management don't really know what's going on, they actually have a requirement in the GDPs. So it is something that we are now leaning on more to say, like, well, actually, this is your company. Do you know what's going on with these number of deviations, or are you trending them? Operations, so that's chapter 5 in the GDP. So this talks about the qualification of suppliers. Again, who are you buying it from? Are you buying it from the same person you're physically receiving it from? Are you selling it to the same person who you're physically sending it to? We have receipt. There's information on how you actually need to receipt in the medicines. Again, it's all about the traceability. Receipt now also requires you to follow with the Falsified Medicines Directive. So they have requirements to meet around that. Storage then, is your medicinal products segregated? Are storage conditions maintained? Temperature, and in particular, the method used for distribution is first expired, first out. So that is called out in the GDPs, and that only on exception can it be first in, first out. So first expired, first out. So, and then the other piece then would be the destruction of obsolete goods so that the records are obtained. What you don't want is that goods have been removed from the market but somehow make their way back into the supply chain. So again, that's where the Falsified Medicines Directive comes in kind of stronger on that piece. Picking and then supply. There's very particular details that are required for the supply of a medicines out, and then export to third countries is to ensure that, you know, they've looked at to see the person receiving it is authorized to receive. Again, some of the paragraphs and under operations will apply to all wholesalers and some of them won't. So what we would normally see around suppliers and customers and the qualification, these are the types of entities in Ireland that we will see that they will receive from. So normally a wholesaler or a manufacturer, so there will be a WDA or MIA holder there. When we're seeing them supply out to the customers can range from a WDA holder to a retail pharmacy business in Ireland. So they are registered under the Pharmaceutical Society of Ireland, so there'll be a PSI number. Doctors are registered under the Irish Medical Council and dentists under the Dental Council. So again, we'll be looking to see that they have actually qualified them and verified their qualifications with the appropriate authority. Due diligence checks does get called out in the GDPs, and I suppose this is where we would see the odd time that maybe a wholesaler might have been offered goods and sometimes the offer is too good to be true, and when they go in to look at who's offering it and the reputation and reliability of the supplier, that they figure out that actually there is something not in line, or maybe the products have been falsified. So offers of products more likely to be falsified, to look for out of range prices, large quantities that are not normally available, and the use of independent verification. It says where available here, but actually that is something that we really push for our wholesalers in Ireland, and in the GDPs it does call out to independently verify. So don't just rely on the documentation you receive from your supplier or customer, go and do your own checks to make sure that it is actually genuine documentation. And just there, for a falsified medicinal product, I suppose it is not just a counterfeit product anymore. The falsified can be with the identity, can be with, so the packaging, the labeling, the name, can be with the source, so the manufacturer, country, or MAH, or even the history now. So down as far as if someone gives you a document and said, oh no, I got that from company A, but really they got it from company B. So that would then push that into a falsified medicinal product. Due diligence checks we have seen in cases where we would say go to websites if someone is saying that they're from this company and they've given you the email and the email is at gmail.com, go to the company website and see, is the company website, are the emails with the company name or are they with gmail.com? Because we have in a number of cases, I suppose, details have been taken from one company and falsified and changed to make it look like it's from another company. Look at delivery documentation. UDRA GDMP is probably where we would say once you're a wholesaler in Europe, their details should be on UDRA GMDP. This is a database that the competent authorities maintain. So again, the information on that is reliable. And then are brokers used? Then do they comply with Chapter 10? And then for all suppliers and customers in Ireland, there's a periodic reassessment of their qualification, and that is done annually in Ireland. The other piece that I suppose has grown since I started in this section, so for the last 7 years, is outsourcing. So again, outsourcing occurs when subcontracting work to another company. So the different types of outsourcing we will see, and again, outsourcing has its own chapter in the GDPs, so it is something that has been highlighted that is occurring more and more often. So they can be transport, storage, pest control, validation, maintenance, auditing, cleaning, calibration, temperature mapping, contract and temporary staff and materials. For we find as well as a lot of companies will outsource work to their sister company, but they actually still need to have a technical agreement in place and audited. So it is an area that is growing, and it's an area that I suppose will take, for some companies, maybe a more of an educational piece than an inspection piece to get them to the standard first of what is required with the GDPs. So outsourcing from the GDP guideline, so this is what it says in the GDPs, is that any activity covered by the GDP guideline that is outsourced should be correctly defined, agreed and controlled in order to avoid misunderstandings which could affect the integrity of the product. There must be a written contract between the contract giver and the contract acceptor which clearly establishes the duties of each party, and the contract giver is responsible for assessing the competency of the contract acceptor to successfully carry out work required. So this is done through audits. Your audit then nowadays can either be an on-site audit, but also we do accept remote or desktop audits if they've been justified and risk assessed. So for outsourcing, there is some key points and responsibilities. So for the contract giver, and these again are all pulled out from the GDPs, they must ensure there is a written contract in place. They must assess the competency of the contract acceptor by auditing before entering the contract, changes to activities in the contract, and routinely. So you can't go into or give business over or responsibility over without having your TA in place originally and then before auditing them. Ensuring that the principles and guidelines of GDP are followed and providing the competent authority or the contractor with all the necessary information to carry out its duties. For the contract acceptor, you shouldn't be accepting a contract unless you have adequate premises and equipment. You should not contract out any contracted activity without the contract giver's prior approval, and you should refrain from any activity which may adversely affect the quality of the product. And then you need to forward on any information that can influence the quality of the product. The other piece, which I said was new to the new GDPs that were issued, was transport. And it calls out that all transport needs to be qualified. So what is a qualified transport system and what do we look for to ensure that you're in compliance with the GDPs? Well, first of all, you will look to see what the product is, where the temperature requirements are, stability and sensitivity, presentation and packaging. We look to see for the logistics provider, are they capable? Have they done an audit and is there a technical agreement? We look to then to see, is there a risk assessment? So has the wholesaler has product requirements, route, complexity, duration, extremes, winter and summer mapping, and the shipping system that's used. And then they're required to do some operation qualification, so OQ work. So make sure that the pre-qualified vehicles and shippers can actually carry at the temperature required. And then performance qualification work. So this is shipping under real conditions, that they will get the information from the shipping, from the transport, to check to see actually that they can maintain the storage conditions. And then once they have that and they understand how it's all working, we expect to see that SOPs and instructions and training and ongoing monitoring and audits are then implemented to ensure that transport maintains the integrity of the medicinal product. So in Ireland, how do we inspect GDP? So we inspect against, for all our inspections, the European directives, the national legislation, our regulations, and our guidance documents. So currently in Ireland, we have 328 wholesalers of medicinal products. We have 74 active substance registrations for human medicines. So this is across GDP and GMP. We have 5 active substance registrations for veterinary medicines. This came in last year, so they were required to register last year. So we have 5 so far. We do have a few manufacturers in Ireland that manufacture veterinary medicinal products. So a lot of the registrations will be companies that provide those manufacturers with their active substances. And we do have 13 brokers of medicinal products. So the 5 inspectors on my team will look after the inspections of all these entities. Typically, we do 2 inspections a week. They are typically one-day inspections, although for the more complex wholesalers, we can send up an inspection team, which in Ireland, we have 2 frontline ones, so 2 main wholesalers. They would get a team of 3 inspectors to 4 to 5 days out there on an annual basis. But generally, it's a one inspector for one day. So our 5 inspectors are out on their own. They do 2 inspections a week. So we're doing 10 inspections every week in our section. How do we implement it? Well, first of all, we receive a new application for a wholesale distribution authorization. Once they have said that they're ready and they have if they're a storage company, that mapping is in place and that they're ready to be inspected and ready to start wholesaling, we do a full GDP inspection. After this inspection, if they are compliant with the GDP guidelines, we will then issue a WDA and a GDP cert. For any new wholesalers, we will go back out within 12 to 18 months or possibly 2 years. And this is because when we first inspect, they do not have any medicines on site. So this is to see what they're actually doing. So a full GDP inspection, again, about 18 months later. After that inspection, they go into a risk assessment program where we then determine how often we're going to go back out to them. Now, for the GDP certificates, they're only valid for 5 years. So you have to go back out to them within a 5-year period. And we would find typically we would go back out to most of the wholesalers in Ireland in around a 3-year period. We do have some wholesalers that just do general sale medicine. So there'd be kind of the medicines that you might see in Ireland. We would have like your Calpol or your low pack of paracetamol that you might see in a corner shop. They would maybe pushed out to 4 years depending on their compliance. But in general, it's an inspection every 3 years. We have gone back out after 6 months, and we do go back out after a year if depending on the compliance history. But just to kind of give you an insight into how we set up our inspection program and how we feed then into those routine inspections. So the inspection process then, so we normally issue a notification 6 weeks prior to inspection. So to let the company know that we're coming out. That is if it's a routine inspection. Obviously, if it's a non-routine inspection or we have information that there is a significant non-compliance, we may not issue a notification at all, or we may issue a notification 24 hours prior. Inspection is known as day 0 in the metrics, I suppose, within the European regulations. After an inspection, you have 90 days to make your decision. So inspection is day 0. Inspection report is issued within 15 days of that inspection. So just bear in mind, our inspectors are doing 2 inspections a week. So they've 2 reports to be issued per week. So it kind of builds up nicely. You need to stay on top of the reports. So they get them at day 15. The company is due a response at day 35. And then we have from day 35 to about day 85 to assess the response, go back with information, and the GDPs and the wholesale regulations or the directive requires that at day 90, a decision is made. So by day 90, you either need to say that company is GDP compliant and issue a GDP certificate, or by day 90, you issue a statement of non-compliance that that company isn't compliant. So they are the timelines that are defined within the directive and the legislation. So it is a very quick turnaround, particularly with 2 inspections a week. There is a lot going on, and I suppose case management comes into play. So why, I suppose the reason for the supply chain and how we have increased visibility is that it all feeds into UDRA GMDP. So this is a database. There is regulatory access that competent authorities have, and then there's a public access. So you can go onto this database and you can see all the wholesalers in Ireland who have a WDA and have a GDP cert, so that we say are meeting the compliance. You can also go on to see the statements of non-compliance that have been given after inspections. So as I said, once an inspection is started, a routine inspection, you have to make a decision within 90 days about that GDP cert or statement of non-compliance. So for the next part, I thought it might be interesting to go and have a look at. We took our inspections that we carried out over a 2-year period, and we had a look to see what parts or what chapters of the EU GDP guidelines were coming up most frequently. So I'm just going to go through a few of the findings just to give you an idea of where wholesalers or the GDPs and how they fit into the inspection process and wholesaling. So we did a review of our inspections. We only concentrated on the medicinal product inspections. As I said, my department we do the active substances and we do controlled drug inspections as well. So it was just purely on over a 2-year period, 286 inspections of medicinal medicine inspection only were carried out, so GDP ones. Like I said, there was other inspections in this 2-year period, but this is just the medicines ones that were carried out. 135 were routine, so that is just their GDP certs were up to date, or there was time on the risk assessment and it was due for their next inspection. 151 were non-routine. These were either for-cause inspections, so this is that we got information that compliance was slipping at this site, or that they wanted a variation to their authorization. So they might have wanted to add cold chain or change their activities, or they wanted to bring in controlled drugs. So again, we go out for a certain number of variations. You have to go out to re-inspect, in particular the more higher risk areas. So out of those 286 inspections, I'm going to have a look at the amount of deficiencies that we gave. So before we do that, just for GDP, I suppose GDP deficiencies are defined in 3 categories. We have a critical deficiency, which is any departure from guidelines of good distribution practice resulting in a medicinal product causing a significant risk to patient or public health. And this includes an activity increasing the risk of falsified medicines reaching patients, a combination of a number of major deficiencies that indicates a serious systems failure, and examples of the critical deficiencies that could be purchase from or supply of medicinal products to a non-authorized person, storage of products requiring refrigeration at ambient temperatures, and also in that storage at ambient temperatures, that I would include transport in that. We have seen companies where the transportation of cold chain has gone out of spec and into ambient temperature, but it wasn't caught on receipt. Rejected or recalled medicinal products found in saleable stock. Again, we've had 1 or 2 issues of that under this 2-year period where medicinal products that should have been recalled, the wrong batch numbers were given to the wholesaler, so they ended up out at a hospital but was just caught in time before they were given to a patient. So again, you can see why these would be defined as critical. A major deficiency is identified as a non-critical deficiency, which indicates a major deviation from our good distribution practice, or has caused or may cause a medicinal product not to comply with its marketing or authorization, in particular storage and transport, and indicates a major deviation from the terms and provision of the wholesale distribution, or else a combination of several other deficiencies. So when we group them together, we can give it as one major rather than a number of individuals. And then another deficiency is just a deficiency that isn't classed as critical or major, but indicates a departure from the guidelines on good distribution practice. I'll just say that the definitions of those deficiencies are a part of the compilation of community procedures, so they are defined for all member states. So the number of inspections containing each type of deficiency, we can see that in this 2-year period, we had 3 inspections that had a critical deficiency. We had 221 inspections that had a major deficiency. There could have been multiple major deficiencies. We were just taking that inspection A had a major deficiency, but it could have had 3, could have had 4. And then we had 282, so nearly all of our inspections would have had some sort of other deficiency. What you'll find is that probably on inspection that deficiencies aren't cited in a class on their own, they're normally combinations. So we can see here that 2 of our inspections were given a critical, major and other deficiency. 1 of our inspections a critical and major. 218 were given major and other deficiencies, and only 63 inspections where we only had other deficiencies. And I suppose what we would like to see, and I suppose what we all strive for, is that when we go out, that our inspections would swing, and that with compliance with their good distribution practice, that we would get those other deficiencies up and reduce down, well, hopefully no criticals, and reduce down the majors and others. I can say that since this work has carried out, we have issued further criticals, unfortunately. So we are definitely still striving to get the good distribution practice guidelines implemented and routinely complied with. So just one last Slido for you. Just out of interest, which chapter of the GDPs would you think has the highest number of deficiencies cited against it? Okay, it looks like from the results that we have quality management system out at around 30%. We have complaints, returns, falsified and premises equipment and operations all around 10 to 15%, and transportation. So quality management system has come out as top. So we'll have a look to see what sections did come out when we did our review. So as you can see here, so in the light blue colour, we have our major deficiencies. So 54% of our major deficiencies were issued against Chapter 5 operations. This is your qualification of your customer and suppliers. This is how you receipt it in, the storage, destruction. You can see there that the next highest for the majors was premises and equipment, and quality management system was in there around the top 3 or 4 for major deficiencies. For our other deficiencies, you can see quality management system is joint number 1 with complaints, returns, suspected falsified medicines and recalls. So that's just an overview of like what we found with our inspection program, and then how we tailor our inspection program and our guidance out to the companies under our remit to try and see, can we get those deficiencies down, or percentage of deficiencies down, and try and improve on our deficiencies that we are cited. So first of all, I'll just have a look at quality management system, as a number of it, or the majority had picked out that they thought this would be the top area. I just want to have a look at what it is and some of the types of deficiencies that we see. So quality management is made up of your quality system. It's made up of your management of outsourced activities. It's made up of your management review and monitoring. So that's where the management of the company has to take responsibility. And it's made up of quality risk management. Now, for some of our entities in Ireland, some are very small, some are big. The idea of quality risk and quality risk management is a new concept to some, and that we're really trying to improve to say, if you actually do your quality risk management, your compliance with the GDPs will go up, because you're catching the issues beforehand. And as I said, quality management, if you have a good quality management system, you can identify issues before they become a problem, and they also allow you to keep compliance with the GDPs. So just some of the examples of deficiencies that would be given under quality management is the failure to conduct risk assessments, failure to conduct change controls, deviations not handled correctly or raised, or a number of deficiencies identified on previous inspections not being addressed. So, you know, we've gone out, we've got our response, we've been told that X, Y, and Z will happen, you go back out and none of it has happened. So similar to that, management review not being performed, or SOPs not reflecting the process at the site. So we can have these beautiful SOPs. When you go down to the floor, you ask them what they're doing, they do nothing like the SOP says, or you go down to the floor and they're actually, what they do is correct, but they haven't translated that into their SOPs and work instructions. And while it's great for those employees, once those employees leave, the next set of employees won't be doing it to their standards. So again, it's about having the SOPs to reflect the process. The other section is operations. So again, operations from the GDPs covers your qualification of suppliers, qualification of customers, receipt, storage, picking, supply and export, and destruction. The qualification of customer and suppliers tends to be deficient, and I suppose this is where the traceability of the supply chain, why you need strong, I suppose, SOPs around the qualification of customers and suppliers, and strong bona fide checks. So as I said, in Ireland, we expect annually that they check the bona fides of their suppliers and customers. So we have that bona fide checks weren't carried out. The company didn't ensure that its customer supplier complied with the principles of GDP. So while we might have an authorization that says, yes, my customer can receive this medicinal product, or my supplier can sell me that medicinal product, they haven't checked to see, well, actually, are they compliant with the GDPs, and is that product that you're going to receive going to be as expected and to the quality. The company then hadn't verified the operations that the customer or supplier was authorized to conduct. And a lot of the times we see that the company haven't verified the correct address, or they verified the wrong address. So that's really important if there's multiple sites. You know, there could be one site that's authorized to actually give the medicines, but if you're receiving them from a different site, that site isn't in compliance with GDP, or that site isn't authorized to handle medicinal products. Again, inadequate traceability records in relation to storage, receipt, picking and supply. And then just quickly on complaints, returns, returned medicinal products, falsified and medicinal product recall. So this is your chapter 6. So this kind of continues on from the traceability, I suppose, because failure to be able to track product can lead to a failure in the recall and returns process. And we have seen cases of this where they know they should have 100, they can only identify 94. They don't know where that other 6 products have gone. So wholesalers need to have the ability to know where the product is to ensure that the product can be recalled, be approved to saleable stock or recalled product, and that it's not accidentally distributed further, as that can lead to a significant issue should a patient receive the stock depending on an issue. And again, we have seen it where product was recalled, should have been in the quarantine area, didn't make it into the quarantine area, but made it back out to the customer, and it had to, luckily, it had to be stopped before it actually was administered to a patient. So deficiencies in this section around chapter 6 are often cited against the management of recalled. So that recalled stock was redistributed. The stock wasn't recalled in a timely manner upon an identification of an issue, that not all stock could be reconciled, or the figures in the reconciliation didn't match. So a number of times you'd go out and you'd be given this lovely recall report, but actually when you go down, they haven't accounted for all the units of the product, or there's been, they've missed that they haven't captured everything. In relation to returns, so deficiencies in this area have included that products have been placed back into saleable stock without RP approval, or there was no assessment that the return document or the final fate of the product was not recorded. So sometimes you go out and you'd say, well, what happened to that returned product? And they don't know. Did it go for destruction? Did it go back onto the shelf? And was it distributed out to a patient? And then regarding complaints, so if complaints are managed correctly, they can identify trends very early in the process and to see if there's a failure to detect, I suppose, a potential critical issue early. So that is why management review is important, and that's why the trending of complaints is really important and can help identify something or help identify systematic issues within your operations. That is my presentation. Hopefully just a minute over, so not too far off your tea break. I will hang around if anyone has any questions, because I know we didn't get a chance to answer any questions in the session because it went a little bit over. But just a summary, I hope you got a basic understanding of GDPs, how we run our inspection program, some of the common deficiencies, and hopefully you gained a little bit of the understanding into how the European GDP guidelines plays into a GDP inspection program. And just at the back of the presentation, I've put in a few key documents that might be worth looking at to get a better understanding. And you can see where, I suppose, our requirements as a regulatory agency come from, and also what we inspect against. So thank you for listening.
Thank you, Barbara. That was such an interesting overview of GDP inspection. I never knew there were so many aspects to it. And I'm also wondering to what extent you've been able to memorize that guideline yourself. There's so many facets in there. But with your permission, I would. I know we're in the coffee break already, but I would like to take a few minutes for questions, because I think there's a lot of material out there. I saw already one raised hand to my right from our Serbian colleague, so please go ahead.
Hello, I'm Jelena Letica from Alims, from Serbia. I have a question. For example, are there any regulations? I know it's based on guidelines, but have you regulations, something by law, something, if you have or not, please?
Yeah, we do. So I suppose in Ireland, we have the regulations are the control of wholesale. So they're medicinal products control of wholesale regulations. They're 2007, but they have been amended as they go on. So they will issue that in those that companies need to apply or comply with the GDPs, and it gives the conditions of the wholesaler's authorization. So we also in Ireland list the conditions that they need to meet, and a lot of those conditions then will fall out of the GDP. So, but yeah, we do have regulations around the actual wholesaling.
And second, you said non-routine inspections. What do you mean by non-routine inspections?
So for us, we have routine inspections, which is when they're just routinely, they go into a risk assessment and they just routinely need to be inspected within a 5-year period to get their GDP cert. Non-routine inspections are like that last case where we get information and we go outside of the period of getting a GDP cert. The other ones would be if a company wanted to add cold chain. So they'd start off that they just did ambient storage, but then they wanted to add cold chain, so your fridges and freezers. We would then go out and inspect, and that would fall under non-routine because it doesn't, we only look at that aspect, but they will still get their general full GDP inspection whenever that was due to fall. So it doesn't change the date of that routine inspection. Does that make?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other question in the room? I see a first lady in the back and then Montenegrin colleague. No.
Hello, I'm Yehona from Macedonian Agency. Does authorization for wholesaling distribution has an expiry date or it's permanent?
So in Ireland, it doesn't have an expiry date, but I suppose your authorization allows you to wholesale, but what your GDP cert does is make sure that you're in compliance. So if we went out to a company who had purchased medicines from someone who had the authorization but didn't have a valid GDP cert or it expired, that would be considered a major deficiency. So they while there's no expiration date on our WDAs, they do go hand in hand. We work it that they go hand in hand with the GDP cert. So I suppose it's kind of like a 5-year cycle.
Okay, thank you.
Sonja Bulajic, Institute for Medical Medicines and Medical Devices, Montenegro, from Inspectorate. Barbara, thank you very much for this very nice and very helpful presentation. We have a few questions, and I don't know, we have a couple of minutes. My colleague will ask some questions. Slađana?
Slađana Mesenic, Montenegro. My question is about deputy RP. Is it allowed that the deputy of RP can be a person with a high school diploma, but with training and experience in GDP for many years?
That's a very good question. So, so for the responsible person, now I'll go with I suppose the GDPs just say experience of pharmacist be nice, and experience and competency. In Ireland, we're small, so I suppose we didn't, into our national legislation, put in the requirement for them to be a pharmacist, but I suppose it is looked upon favourably when we get in an application. For us, we have found that competency and experience now is where we're really focusing on. We have ended up with responsible persons and deputy responsible persons on authorizations that just didn't have the experience. So regardless of whether it is someone with a high school degree, if they have worked in supply chain and they know it, they have been in, say, the company or companies around that for a number of years, we would allow them on as a deputy responsible person, and they could even work their way up to being a responsible person once they had enough years experience and have shown competency around the regulations. But again, I know in some member states, they request specific education and training. Like I said, we're small. We would be limiting our field too much if we did that, so that's why we haven't.
Thank you very much. Our country is also too small, but I really want to thank you. I enjoyed your presentation.
I'm glad. I didn't know where to aim it, so I'm glad you got some information from it.
See a question there from our gentleman.
Hello, I'm Bekim from Kosovo Food and Veterinary Agency. Just one question, please. I am interested about active substances. I saw it's in veterinary use. You have it's some substances that are for use in veterinary use. Just I'm interesting regarding the residue. It's some residue, some active substance, which the residue which they impact in the human health. They are connected with some residue, with some substances, banned substances in veterinary medicine. These banned substances, they are under your institution, or they should cooperate with regulation from Ministry of Agriculture, because there are some banned substances which they apply to the animals. They have a direct impact to the humans. Thank you.
So I'm not sure I'm going to be able to answer your question fully, but I can explain maybe the situation in Ireland a little bit more. So for the HPRA, we do the assessment and authorization of veterinary medicines. So we have a section on that. We look at the manufacturers of veterinary medicines, and we would look at then the supply of the APIs, so the active substances in. They are kind of two distinct pathways. So I suppose, are you asking if could a wholesaler or a distributor have both, or am I?
Sorry?
So you were talking about the residue there.
Yes.
Is it about the storage of those products together, or?
No, it's some banned substance.
Yeah.
Which they, when the withdrawing, they have the withdraw, and they checking for the residue. That residue may be some banned substance like chloramphenicol, or some diazinon, some products which they ban it in veterinary. And after that, they check in residue.
Yeah.
They did your, like the body, your body, they checking this, or they in Ministry of Agriculture. This all together. Just for me, it's one. I think just one question. Just a question about regarding this.
I think, yeah, when it comes down, I suppose we would do the authorization, but the implementation would then fall to Department of Agriculture. They would go out and look at
Okay, thanks.
I realize we're overrunning quite a bit. I see a question there. If there's more questions, we can still take them, but it also depends on you. We could also continue in the break, but please go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you. I'll be short. I agree that we all enjoy your presentation. It raised a big interest among all of us. Mirjana Doncheva from Macedonian Agency. I'm wondering, do you have jurisdiction as GDP inspectors in a case where some legal provisions are not followed? If the company acts against the legal provisions, do you have a responsibility and jurisdiction to take some penalties and to proceed with the court procedures?
Yeah, so as an agency, we do. So what would happen in that case is that we would go out on inspection. We would gather the information, but if we're going to go down the legal route, we have an enforcement section who then are, I suppose, trained and equipped to bring cases to court. We also have a legal department, but it would move from an inspection compliance case into an enforcement case, and they would end up doing the court part of it.
All right, thank you. I think we have room for one or two more questions, if there are any. And otherwise, I suggest, yes, please go ahead.
Thank you. Jadranka Mirković from Serbian Medicines Agency. I wanted to ask about export to third countries. Is it under WDA as automatic activity, or is it separate specific activity? Can all wholesalers be automatically approved to do export, or have the separate activity?
So it's a separate authorized activity, so they have to apply to do it. A number of them will have it on their WDAs. You know, a lot of them will go procure, supply and export just to keep the market open. It's not something we will go and look at in relation to the procedures, but there's also then a regulation that all wholesalers have to are required to keep a public service obligation. And what that means in Ireland is that they have to ensure that the Irish patient is served first, or I suppose that there is product for the Irish patient before it can be exported out of Ireland. So there's a few extra checks a wholesaler who has export on and who is engaging in export need to do, and that we would inspect. But yes, they can export if they have a customer there.
All right. Does anyone have a final question for now? Otherwise, I propose we go into the break. I would like to thank you once again, Barbara.